You wake slowly, the kind of groggy, reluctant waking that happens when your body already knows the air is colder than you'd prefer. Your first breath fogs faintly in front of your face, and you realize you're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress tucked inside a narrow alcove, carved directly into castle stone. The wall at your back is cool enough to make you question every life choice that led you here, including clicking on a YouTube video about ancient castles, but here we are. A soft dawn glow filters through a tiny arrow-slit window, barely enough light to see your own hands, yet somehow enough to make the room feel drafty. You pull the coarse wool blanket tighter around yourself and sit up slowly, hearing the faint groan of timber beams above you. And yes, the thought does cross your mind that you probably won't make it through this day. But it's fine. I believe in you. Sort of. As you stretch, your shoulders brush against thick woven wall hangings, one of the clever, medieval tricks for warmth. These tapestries aren't just decoration, they're insulation, working overtime to trap what little heat the night managed to hold. The wool feels rough under your fingertips, its patterns faded by time and candle soot. Outside your room, you hear distant footsteps on stone. Soft and muffled, someone already awake and probably regretting it just as much as you are. A slow draft drifts down the corridor as you step into the hallway, reminding you that this castle, grand as it might look from the outside, was basically a giant refrigerator with a battlement. Fireplaces aren't a thing yet in most rooms. Chimneys won't become common until centuries from now, so everyone has to get creative, which explains the heavy curtains hanging across doorways, turning each room into a cocoon of fabric meant to soften the bite of winter. A historical fact floats into your mind. Medieval builders intentionally made windows small not just for defense, but to keep heat from escaping too quickly. The downside? You get natural lighting so dim, it makes a modern 2-watt nightlight look like the sun. You pass a chamber where several servants huddle around a clay pot that radiates faint warmth. It's called a brazier, basically a portable medieval space heater. They're feeding it embers from the Great Hall's central hearth, a practice that kept rooms bearably warm without risking open flames everywhere. A strange yet charming tidbit. In some parts of Europe, people even warmed stones in the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and tucked them into beds like prehistoric electric heating pads. Historians still debate whether this actually worked well or was just a warm-up act for frostbite. You rub your hands together, listening to the distant clatter of morning activity. With every step, your bare feet encounter alternating temperatures. Cold stone, then a rush over, a rush-strewn floor, then stone again. Rushes, those plant stalks scattered across the floors, act like a crude carpet, trapping dust and offering the tiniest buffer against the icy world beneath. Changing them regularly would have been ideal, but let's be honest, they did not always change them regularly. Your nose confirms this before your brain fully registers it. A castle hound trots by, pausing to give you a look that says, "You chose to wake up? Amateur." Its fur is thick, built for weather like this, and for a moment you envy the creature. Somewhere behind you, a rooster crows from the Bailey courtyard, far too enthusiastically for someone who doesn't have to worry about frost creeping through their blanket every night. You wander toward the Great Hall, following the faint heat that radiates from the large central hearth, the castle's main source of warmth. Even now, with the fire newly stoked, the smoke curls upward and escapes through a hole in the ceiling. No chimney, just a hole. Efficient? Questionable. Effective? Somewhat. Drafty? Absolutely. The gentle reminder from your storyteller self slips in here. If you're enjoying this quiet medieval morning, and if your toes haven't frozen off, feel free to lightly tap that like button. Not for the algorithm, but because it makes these sleepy journeys reach more fellow night owls. And if you feel comfortable, comment your location and the local time. It's strangely calming to know how many people across the world are drifting into sleep together. You pause near the hearth, letting the warmth seep into your bones. The flames crackle softly, the sound playing almost like a medieval relaxation soundtrack. You take a breath, slow, warm, grounded, and let your shoulders drop just a little. The day hasn't truly begun yet, but already the castle feels alive around you. Servants murmuring, banners rustling, the low hum of early chores echoing off stone walls. Remember the narrow hallway you passed through earlier? The draft from its tiny window returns in a whisper as someone opens a side door, reminding you that warmth here is a temporary visitor. Still, You can feel yourself settling into the rhythm of castle life, your breath syncing with the soft crackling of fire and footsteps in the distance. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You leave the glow of the great hall's hearth, stepping back into the corridor, where the cold promptly greets you like an over-enthusiastic acquaintance who never got the hint. Your breath fogs again, because of course it does, and you instinctively tug your wool cloak tighter around your shoulders. You're learning quickly that castle survival isn't about bravery or honor, or heroic quests. It's about fabric. Layers of fabric. Fabric on top of fabric. And then one more layer, just in case the wind questions your resolve. As you walk, a servant woman passes by, balancing a stack of freshly beaten woolen garments. Each piece looks thick enough to stand up on its own, and you suddenly understand why medieval clothing always seemed bulky in illustrations. This wasn't a fashion statement. It was self-defense. A historical fact drifts into your mind. People in cold climates sometimes wore as many as 3 tunics at once. One for warmth, one for decency, and one for, well, insulation. A medieval version of, if I take this off, the whole outfit falls apart. Your fingers graze the stone wall as you make your way down the stairway toward the castle's residential wing. The stones feel older here, smoother from centuries of passing hands and shoulders. High above, a tiny shuttered window lets in the faintest thread of morning light. When you pass below it, a draft slips neatly down the back of your neck, like it paid rent to be there. You mutter something under your breath, and to your credit, it is both PG-rated and impressively modern for a medieval inhabitant. Halfway down the hall, you encounter a curious contraption. A thick wooden screen positioned in front of a doorway. It's decorated with rough carvings and wrapped in heavy fabric. And for a moment, you're not sure if it's meant to block noise, drafts, or both. It turns out to be the medieval equivalent of the "close the door, you're letting all the heat out" speech. People used these movable screens to break up airflow and keep warm pockets of air from wandering off into the rest of the castle like rebellious teenagers. Scholars still debate whether these screens were primarily decorative or practical, but most agree they were better than nothing. And better than nothing is the motto of medieval heating solutions. You turn into a bedchamber, where a pair of noble sisters are layering themselves for the day like human onions. First the linen chemise, then the wool kirtle, a second wool kirtle, a hood, maybe a cloak, and perhaps a third kirtle if the wind feels dramatic. They glance at you briefly, but in that polite, half-asleep way that suggests you look just as cold as they feel. One of them tosses you a spare garment, a thick shawl dyed a faded green. "You'll want this," she says, her voice soft and a little pitying. And honestly, she's right. You wrap it around your shoulders, feeling instantly 10% less like an icicle. A subtle but odd cultural tidbit emerges as you move toward the window. Some medieval folks believed drafts weren't just uncomfortable, they could literally make you sick by carrying bad air. This was the era before germ theory, when cold breezes were blamed for everything from sniffles to melancholy. You step away from the window swiftly, deciding you have enough problems without accidental medieval sadness. The castle stirs in a slow, predictable rhythm. Somewhere below, the kitchen staff chops vegetables with the enthusiasm of people who have been awake too long. Your ears catch the clinking of pots, the shuffling of boots, the occasional muffled complaint about the cold. A maid hurries past with a bundle of reeds to refresh the rushes on the floor. You lift one eyebrow, changing the rushes. This must be a special occasion. Or someone dropped something disgusting. A sleepy guard leans on his spear in the hallway. The poor man, wrapped in so many layers, he looks like a woolen scarecrow. He gives you a polite nod, though his eyes suggest he is trying desperately not to fall asleep standing up. You give him an encouraging nod back, silently cheering on his valiant effort to remain conscious in this freezer disguised as a castle. As you approach another doorway, you catch a familiar scent: warm milk. Inside, a young servant is carefully pouring hot milk into a small ceramic jug. You watch as she wraps the jug in cloth and carries it toward the noble family's rooms. Medieval hot water bottles were often just warm liquids in sealed containers or heated stones wrapped in cloth. The trick wasn't fancy, but it kept fingers and faces from freezing before dawn. Innovation comes in all forms, especially when central heating won't exist for several centuries. You walk along a balcony overlooking the inner ward, hearing the muffled chatter of merchants setting up outside the castle gates. Below, The stable hands are brushing down horses, their breath misting in the air like tiny puffs of smoke. Humans may struggle with the cold, but horses seem to tolerate it with the calm indifference of creatures who wear built-in warm coats. The wind picks up as you step into the next hallway, curling around your legs like a cat made of ice. You wrap the green shawl tighter and tuck your chin down into it. You can't help but feel a little proud of yourself. You've survived the morning so far. Sort of. Maybe. Let's not get overconfident. A familiar draft brushes your ankles. Remember the hallway from earlier? Yep. It's back. Persistent, nosy, and oddly committed to making sure your journey stays authentic. You inhale the faint scents of wool, wood smoke, and morning bread as the castle continues to wake around you. The day is just beginning, and so is your slow, careful battle against the cold. You step outside into the castle's inner courtyard, and the cold greets you with a full, unapologetic slap to the face. Not literally, this isn't that kind of History Channel, but the temperature drops so sharply that your eyebrows try to retreat into your forehead for safety. A thin mist clings to the cobblestones, curling around your boots as you walk. The sky above is pale and washed out, the kind of hesitant winter light that seems unsure about committing to being daytime. The courtyard is already alive with activity. Servants hurry across with baskets of laundry, their arms wrapped tightly around the bundles to keep them from freezing stiff. 2 children chase each other near the well, bundled so thoroughly in wool that they resemble tiny, mobile sweaters. You watch them run, marveling at their resilience, and privately acknowledging that if you attempted the same level of enthusiasm, you'd probably sprain your soul. A mason passes by hauling stones, his breath puffing like chimney smoke. He notices your shiver and smirks. "First winter here?" he asks. And you nod because explaining your bizarre time-traveling situation would take too long and might raise questions you're not prepared to answer. He chuckles and says, "Layer thick, move fast, and don't think too hard about your toes." Sage advice. Not comforting, but sage. You skirt around a stack of firewood. Yes, firewood. Even though fireplaces aren't widespread here. This stockpile is destined for the great hall hearth, the kitchen ovens, and a handful of braziers scattered throughout the castle. Here's a historical fact for you. Medieval wood was often greener and wetter than ideal, which made fires smoky and unreliable. Imagine trying to stay warm while also being mildly smoked like a piece of fish. Cozy. As you continue walking, your eye catches something unusual. A servant carrying a bundle of freshly dried herbs. Rosemary, lavender, and thyme, tied neatly and hung in clusters beneath a covered walkway. They weren't just for cooking. Medieval people used fragrant herbs to mask cold season odors or to clean the air, believing good smells chased away illness. It's a charming idea, though historians still debate whether anyone genuinely thought lavender could defeat the cold, or if it was just a pleasant placebo with good PR. A few paces away, a carpenter is hammering together a wooden frame for what looks like a tent. You step closer and realize it's a pavilion-style canopy that will be set up indoors to trap warm air around someone's bed. Essentially, a medieval fort made of fabric. The carpenter wipes his brow and mutters, "Lord's orders," he says. The wind is plotting against him. You can't blame him. After the drafts in this place, you suspect the wind absolutely is plotting. The morning continues to unfold in its slow rhythm. A cook emerges from the kitchen carrying a steaming pot of pottage, and the wave of warmth that accompanies him is strong enough to make your eyes water. You inhale deeply and feel your stomach rumble, a reminder that you haven't eaten since before this medieval adventure began. The cook notices your gaze and offers a sympathetic shrug, but he keeps walking. Even in the Middle Ages, people treat strangers near the kitchen with healthy suspicion. Crossing the courtyard, you make your way toward a covered walkway that leads to the outer ward. The stone beneath your feet is slick with dew that refuses to freeze fully, as if nature can't make up its mind. You pass by a collection of chickens scratching at the ground, their feathers puffed out like irritable pillows. One of them gives you a look of unprovoked judgment. Chickens, you realize, are the same in every century. Near the far wall, you spot an armored guard warming his hands over a small charcoal brazier. He has removed his gauntlets, holding his palms out toward the faint glow, as if greeting a long-lost friend. "Cold one," he says when he notices you. You nod because the only alternative is crying, and neither of you has emotional bandwidth for that. He gestures to the brazier. These help, he says, but don't breathe too close. The fumes'll put you on your back. A cheerful warning, but accurate. Charcoal braziers were common sources of heat, but they produced carbon monoxide long before anyone understood what carbon monoxide was. Staying warm, you realize, occasionally came with side quests like, don't pass out in the hallway. You walk on, the breeze nipping at your face. The wind whistles between tower walls like a distant flute, its notes soft but sharp enough to raise goosebumps. You pull your layers tighter and remind yourself that this is all a learning experience. A cold, unpredictable, draft-filled learning experience. But still, the courtyard begins to brighten as the hesitant sun gains confidence, casting long shadows across the ground. You take one more deep breath, letting the cold air swell your lungs. It's bracing, invigorating, and also extremely unpleasant, but it makes you feel awake in a way modern heating never does. And so your day inside this ancient stone fortress continues, one careful breath and one cold toe at a time. You slip back into the covered passageway and follow the muted hum of voices until the vast wooden doors of the great hall come into view again. Even from several paces away, heat wafts outward, thin, inconsistent, but still noticeably warmer than the courtyard you just survived. You pause before stepping in, letting the warmth brush over your face, like the world's most reluctant welcome. The heavy iron hinges creak softly as you push the door open and walk inside. The great hall is already alive with the sounds of morning. Low chatter, clattering bowls, the pop and hiss of the central hearth. The fire here is the closest thing the medieval world has to a celebrity. Everyone relies on it. Everyone gathers around it. And everyone complains when it doesn't behave. You walk toward the blaze, drawn like a moth who learned its lesson last time, and now keeps a respectful distance. The flames crackle against thick logs arranged in a wide, shallow pit on the stone floor. There's no chimney, just that large opening above, letting smoke drift upward and then sideways and sideways again, and sometimes just straight into people's eyes. It's a historical fact that many castle halls relied on this primitive ventilation system for centuries, even after chimneys became a thing. Medieval people, you realize, were astonishingly patient or astonishingly smoky. Possibly both. A servant tosses another log onto the fire, sending a small burst of sparks upward. You watch them rise toward the darkened rafters, which are coated in a layer of soot so thick it could probably qualify as its own geological layer. A tapestry hangs behind the high table at the far end of the hall, thick, colourful, and large enough to cover a draughty portion of stone wall. It depicts some heroic scene involving a stag, a spear, and a hunter who looks suspiciously like he's wearing eyeliner. The tapestry also hums with trapped heat, radiating warmth like a woolen sun. You take a wooden cup offered by a passing kitchen boy, warm barley water, surprisingly comforting despite tasting like slightly embarrassed cereal. You sip it and feel the warmth travel slowly down your chest, thawing the stiffness, settling in your fingers. A noblewoman nearby leans across the table to rewrap a fur-lined mantle around her shoulders. When she sees you watching, she shrugs. It's not fashion, she says. It's survival. You nod in solemn agreement. The hall's long tables stretch outward, littered with trenchers, half loaves of bread, and a few early bowls of broth meant for those who woke before dawn. You pick up the faint smell of onions cooking somewhere in the kitchen, mingling with the smoky air. A young page scurries past carrying a large pot wrapped in cloth, muttering, "Careful, careful," under his breath, which does not inspire confidence. A weird but true cultural tidbit surfaces here. Some medieval households kept live animals inside during winter nights. Chickens, goats, even the occasional cow for warmth. Shared body heat, shared smells, shared regrets. You glance around, half expecting to see a goat curled up by the fire like a loyal lapdog. Thankfully, today's hall is goat-free. Progress comes in many forms. On your left, two stewards converse in hushed tones about the day's wood supply. Their worried expressions tell you everything you need to know. It's never enough. Wood burns quickly, forests are expensive, and careless nobles sometimes demand roaring fires that drain half a winter's stash in a single evening. Historians still debate whether some castles truly rationed firewood as strictly as described in records, or whether these accounts were exaggerated by cold medieval scribes with a flair for drama. You move closer to the hearth, stretching your hands toward the flames. The heat tingles your skin, sending tiny pins of sensation prickling outward. Someone behind you chuckles as you visibly relax. "First thaw of the day," he says knowingly. You smile without turning around, because you are too busy not freezing. As you stand there, you notice how people cluster naturally into temperature-based zones. There's the inner circle, the ring of warmth seekers closest to the fire, who rotate like human rotisserie chickens. Then there's the middle band, where warmth exists only if you lean slightly forward and believe in it. And finally, the outer cold zone, a shadowy region near the walls where warmth dares not wander. You decide immediately that you are not an outer zone person. Not today. Not ever. A dog sleeps near the fire, its fur rising and falling softly. Every so often it twitches, chasing medieval rabbits in its dreams. You envy it deeply. A guard stands nearby, polishing his helmet, pausing occasionally to warm his fingers. He notices your gaze and shrugs. Steel gets cold. Hands get colder. You take another sip from your cup, feeling the liquid settle warmly in your stomach. For a moment, the world feels gently suspended. The murmur of voices blends with the steady rhythm of the fire. Everything slows, softens, and steadies. You let your shoulders drop and breathe, leaning into the quiet comfort the hall offers, even if just temporarily. Remember the courtyard wind that tried to uproot your soul earlier? It's still out there, but for now, you're wrapped in warmth, wooden beams overhead humming with familiar medieval coziness. You stay here a few moments longer, savoring the heat, before stepping back into the hallway and letting the story carry you onward. You follow the scent of something warm, savory, and suspiciously hopeful toward the castle kitchens. The transition from hall to kitchen passageway is abrupt, like stepping from a half-warm room into a place that genuinely believes in temperature. The air grows thick with the aroma of stewing vegetables, fresh bread, and boiling broth. It is, without exaggeration, the warmest space you've encountered today. You linger in the doorway shamelessly. The castle kitchen is a bustling winter miracle. Fires burn in several hearths, pots bubble, bread bakes, steam rises like soft fog, curling through beams and turning the air into a moist, edible hug. You inhale deeply. Your stomach responds with a small, hopeful growl. A cook with flour on her nose notices you hovering and laughs. "Cold, are you?" she asks. You give her a look that contains at least 6 layers of meaning. "Yes. Help, please." She gestures you forward with a wooden ladle. "Stand by the oven. Don't touch it unless you fancy becoming tomorrow's cautionary tale." You obey. Warmth radiates from the clay oven beside you, enveloping your face and fingers. A historical fact slips quietly into your awareness. Medieval kitchens were sometimes the only rooms in a castle reliably warm year-round. Staff often slept nearby in winter, preferring the comfort of smoky heat over the dignity of designated quarters. Across the room, a boy turns a spit loaded with root vegetables, humming tunelessly while trying not to let his eyebrows singe off. A pair of kitchen maids stir a huge pot of pottage, the all-purpose medieval stew that somehow appeared at every meal. One maid tosses in herbs, the other stirs with the strength of someone who has fought many battles with thick porridge. You notice an odd little bundle hanging near the oven, a cloth packet filled with warmed grains. A kitchen trick, something like an early heating pad used to warm hands, soothe stomach aches, or preheat bed linens before sleep. You gently touch it, feeling the soft heat through the cloth. People centuries ago really were masters of small, practical warmth. You're handed a bowl of breakfast pottage, thick, earthy, steaming. The first spoonful tastes like oat-based optimism. You feel warmth spread through your chest and shoulders, the way modern people feel after sipping overpriced lattes in winter. A cook tells you, "Eat slow. It cools quick in these walls." Wise advice. While you eat, you watch a servant leaning over a brazier filled with glowing charcoal. She's warming a bundle of linens meant for the Lord's bed. "He can't stand cold sheets," she mutters, says it's like being welcomed by a ghost. You can't argue with that description. Cold sheets are aggressively supernatural. A strange cultural tidbit surfaces. Some medieval households used bed curtains not for privacy, but to trap body heat inside a small enclosed space. You peek through the doorway into an adjoining chamber and, indeed, see a four-poster bed draped with heavy curtains. It looks less like a bed and more like a heat-seeking fortress. The kitchen bustles around you. Someone drops a ladle. Someone curses lightly in a period-appropriate manner. Someone else opens a door and unleashes a gust of cold air that earns a collective groan from everyone within range. The door is promptly slammed shut. Peace and warmth return. As you finish your bowl, you hear two cooks whispering about a rumor that the castle's master wants to install new shutters on the west tower. Won't help, one says. The wind comes from everywhere. The other nods solemnly. The wind has its own map. Scholars still debate whether castles were genuinely colder than common houses or whether chroniclers exaggerated the discomfort. But standing here, watching your breath still faintly fog even in the kitchen's warmth, you suspect the scribes might have been honest for once. You set your empty bowl down and thank the cook, who waves you off with the casual affection of someone who feeds everyone without keeping score. As you move toward the door, she calls out, "Take warmth with you if you can." You smile at the sentiment. Even though the moment you open the door, it's brutally clear you did not, in fact, take any warmth with you. Stepping back into the corridor, the castle's cold presses close, once more, gentle, persistent, inevitable. But you feel sturdier now, warmed from the inside, ready for whatever drafty ordeal comes next. You make your way toward the service stairwell, guided by faint echoes of clanking metal and bustling preparations for the day's tasks. The moment you step inside the stair tower, the temperature drops just enough to remind you that comfort is a fleeting concept here. The stone spiral staircase curves upward and downward like a cold, grey seashell. You choose upward partly out of curiosity, partly because downward feels like it would lead directly into a medieval refrigerator disguised as a storage room. Your footsteps echo in the narrow space, accompanied by a soft whistle of wind slipping through arrow slits in the wall. Arrow slits are excellent for defense and terrible for toes. You pass one and instinctively step farther from the wall, because the breeze is sharp enough to make your ankles reconsider their loyalty to you. At the top of the stairs, you emerge into a long gallery lined with narrow windows. Sunlight spills in weakly, as if apologizing for not trying harder. A handful of servants move up and down the hallway carrying bundles of garments, tools, and supplies. They weave around each other with the effortless choreography of people who have lived their entire lives avoiding collisions in tight spaces. One man brushes past you holding a bucket of steaming water. You feel the briefest kiss of warm air pass your cheek, and you nearly chase after him like a medieval cat. The bucket is headed to a chamber where laundry is being washed this morning, one of the tasks that actually generates warmth. Historically, washing clothes in winter was rare, and only done when absolutely necessary, because water froze, hands froze, and morale froze. Every medieval chore was basically a survival minigame. A maid enters the laundry room just ahead of you and props the door open with her hip. You peek inside and immediately sigh with relief. The room is filled with rising steam and the warm smell of damp linen. Wooden tubs sit near the hearth, and several women kneel beside them, scrubbing vigorously. Thick cloths hang from stretched ropes overhead, dripping slowly into buckets placed strategically below. One woman, noticing your awe, lifts an eyebrow. "Cold upstairs?" You nod. She laughs a quick, bright sound. "Stay long enough, and the cold stops bothering you." She pauses, then adds, "Or you just stop noticing." Hard to tell which. You appreciate the honesty. A historical fact slips into your thoughts. People often boiled water for washing in large cauldrons set over fires, not because they wanted cleanliness, but because warm water made the work quicker and bearable. In an era without central heating, chores doubled as warming stations. You step closer to the hearth, where a large copper pot bubbles steadily. The fire's glow casts soft gold onto the stone walls, lending a rare softness to the room. It feels like stepping into a warm pocket hidden inside the castle's vast, drafty shell. As you linger, you overhear a peculiar conversation between two laundresses. One is complaining that her hands stay red for hours after washing. The other nods and offers a chunk of sheep's tallow, explaining that some people used it as a hand balm in winter. "Keeps the skin from splitting," she says. A weird cultural tidbit. Tallow was a medieval multi-tool used for cooking, candles, soap, and apparently skincare. We love a product with range. Leaving the laundry room is a tiny emotional tragedy. But you press on, wrapping your cloak tighter as the hall swallows you back into its cool breath. A guard walks past, tapping frost off the edge of his spear. His armor clinks softly as he shifts his stance. He looks at you with mild pity. "First winter here?" he asks. You nod again because it's still the easiest answer. He gestures with his chin toward a side passage. "Try the solar. It's warmer this time of day." You thank him and follow the direction. The solar, essentially the Lord's private sitting room, is indeed warmer. Not warm, mind you, just warmer. The difference is subtle but meaningful. Like choosing a slightly less uncomfortable seat on a long bus ride, a fire burns modestly in a small hearth, and sunlight from a large window adds just enough heat to take the edge off. A pair of noble women sit near the window doing needlework. Their fingers move with icy grace, stitching thread into soft wool. "It's warmer near the window than by the bed," one murmurs, though her tone implies the window is doing the bare minimum. You take a seat on a nearby bench and feel the faintest warmth sink into your bones. Scholars still debate how private solars truly were. Some say they were intimate family rooms. Others say servants passed through constantly. Today, it seems pleasantly quiet. Just a room where people gather to take advantage of the one spot the sun feels like visiting. For a few moments, you enjoy the warmth and listen to the rhythmic sound of needles through cloth. It's soothing, almost melodic. You breathe deeply, letting the peacefulness settle across your shoulders like an extra cloak. Then a draft creeps in through the window's shuttered edge and taps the back of your neck like an uninvited guest. You sigh. The cold never really leaves, it just waits politely. You stand, stretch, and step back into the corridor. The castle hums gently around you, as if encouraging you onward, and onward you go. Your footsteps lead you toward one of the castle's corner towers, an impressive stone column rising above the rest of the fortress, like a giant, ancient thermos that forgot how to thermos. The stairwell door creaks open as you push it, revealing yet another spiral staircase coiling upward into shadows. You start climbing, and the temperature drops with each step, as if cold air has anxiously waited all morning to show off its full resume. Your breath fogs instantly. The stone beneath your hand feels like it was carved from frozen moonlight. You pull your cloak tighter, muttering something quietly sarcastic that echoes up the stairwell. About halfway up, you pass a small guard chamber, just a square platform with a wooden stool, a narrow window, and a guard so bundled in wool he looks like a disgruntled snowball. He nods at you, face half hidden beneath layers. "Cold up there," he warns. You nod back. "Cold here," you reply. He considers this. "Fair point." You continue, climbing. A historical fact rises to mind. Towers were notoriously difficult to heat. Their height acted like a chimney, drawing warm air upward and pushing cold drafts down. Even tapestries and heavy curtains struggled to compete with physics. You can feel this truth deeply as the wind sneaks through cracks in the stones, brushing your ankles and elbows with icy fingers. Near the top, you push open a small wooden door and step into a tower chamber. The room is round, lined with stone, and lit by the faintest winter sunlight spilling through two arrow slits. A wooden table sits near the center, covered with maps, quills, and a flickering candle that seems to be losing its will to live. A scribe hunches over one of the maps, shoulders wrapped in layers of wool. He looks up as you enter. "Close the door," he murmurs. The wind eats the ink. An odd cultural tidbit: writers in drafty towers often struggled with ink freezing, candles sputtering, and parchment curling from cold. Your modern appreciation for heated writing rooms grows exponentially. You close the door behind you, but the temperature barely notices. The scribe gestures toward a heated brick set near his feet, a brick that was likely warmed in the kitchen hearth and carried up here, wrapped in cloth, like a medieval rechargeable battery. Except its main function is, feet don't freeze. You crouch beside it, feeling faint warmth radiate from its surface. You're momentarily grateful someone carried this heavy brick up several flights of stairs, because you absolutely would not have. As you look around the chamber, you notice frost clinging lightly to the inner edge of one window. The view outside is breathtaking, the surrounding countryside covered in a thin layer of morning mist, the fields silvered with dew or frost, the horizon pale and soft, beautiful, also freezing. The scribe resumes his writing, muttering as he works. Occasionally he pauses to breathe on his inkpot, warming it, with soft puffs. Historians still debate, he says absently, not realizing he's speaking aloud, whether these towers were designed to be this cold, or whether the builders simply gave up halfway. You smile quietly. Even medieval people questioned medieval architecture. A gust of wind presses against the window, and the room responds with a long, weary sigh, a moan through the stones. You wrap your shawl tightly and step toward the arrow slit, peering outside. The wind is sharp enough to make your eyes water, but the view is serene. Distant villages, winding roads, bare winter trees, swaying gently in the breeze. Then another draft weaves through the chamber and wraps around your ankles once again. You've begun to realize that cold in a castle is not a condition, it's a personality. Persistent, petty, dedicated. You turn toward the stairwell, knowing you've seen enough tower cold for one lifetime. The scribe offers a small wave. "Mind the wind on your way down," he says. You nod. "I will," you reply, though the wind has made it clear it has no intention of minding you. You descend the stairs slowly, listening to the faint echoes of your own footsteps, feeling the stone cool against your fingertips, letting yourself sink back into the rhythm of castle life, cold, persistent, imperfect, and somehow comfortingly human. Reaching the bottom of the tower steps feels like returning from an expedition to the North Pole, medieval edition. Your knees ache, your cloak feels heavier, and your toes have begun sending passive-aggressive complaints up your legs. You step back into the corridor and pause, letting the castle's relative warmth, relative being the key word, settle around you like a thin, confused hug. You wander down the hallway until you notice something odd. A faint, rising warmth drifting through the stones beneath your feet. It's subtle, almost imaginary, but warmer than anything you've felt outside the kitchen. You crouch, down, press your palm to the stone floor, and blink in surprise. The floor is warmish, which, in a castle, is suspicious enough to warrant an investigation. A servant carrying firewood passes by, notices your puzzled expression, and grins. "Found one of the warm spots, have you?" she says. You raise an eyebrow. She sets the wood down, gestures for you to follow, and leads you around the corner to a short stairwell. "You feel that," she whispers, "because the bakehouse is right below." Ah, the medieval heating system you never realized existed. Accidental floor heating, courtesy of ovens big enough to roast an entire feast. Historically accurate, too, rooms built above kitchens and bakeries sometimes stayed noticeably warmer, especially in the early mornings when the ovens were freshly stoked. The servant lifts the corner of a rush mat on the floor, revealing a faint trail of heat rising through the stone cracks. "If you ever need to thaw your bones," she says, "look for floors like this." You thank her gravely, feeling as though she has shared privileged survival intelligence. You wander down the next corridor, testing the ground like a medieval warmth detective. Cold, cold, slightly less cold. Aha, warmish again. Congratulations, you've discovered the castle's unofficial cozy zone. It's like finding a heated tile in the world's draftiest sauna. A historical fact drifts into your mind. In some wealthier castles, people even built rooms directly above the kitchen on purpose, just to capture the heat rising through the floor. Entire domestic arrangements revolved around being as close to the kitchen as dignity allowed. Your attention shifts to a small wooden door cracked open at the end of the corridor. Soft light spills out. You gently push it farther and step inside. It's a storage room, but a special kind. Barrels line the walls. Cloth-wrapped bundles hang from ceiling beams. Dried herbs rustle faintly overhead. And the air? Warm. Not warm, but comfortably warm, like a sunbeam that decided to hang around indoors. A plump grey cat is curled on top of a grain sack, basking in the rising heat like it owns stock in the bakery below. The cat lifts its head, studies you with mild suspicion, then decides you're unimportant and resumes napping. You sit beside the grain sack, soaking in the comfort. The warmth settles into your cloak, seeps into your sleeves, eases the tension in your neck. For a moment, you understand why people use this room for more than storage. A maid slips inside quietly behind you, carrying cloth-wrapped bricks. She doesn't startle. Apparently this room attracts cold survivors regularly. "If you're cold," she whispers, Put these in your sleeves. She hands you a brick. It's warm, wrapped in linen like the brick you saw in the tower, but fresher, hotter. Someone must have heated them minutes ago. A peculiar cultural tidbit surfaces. Some medieval people warmed stones in the oven, wrapped them, and carried them around like portable heat charms. Like ancient power banks, except instead of charging your phone, they kept you alive. You tuck the warm brick under your cloak. Bliss radiates outward. Then, because life has a sense of humor, a cold draft slithers under the door and brushes your ankles. You glance down. The maid sighs. It finds us everywhere. You gather yourself and step back into the hallway, warm brick in hand. You feel braver now. Softer. More human. Thousands of people, centuries before you, did this exact same thing, searching for warmth, clutching heated stones, carving out tiny miracles inside giant walls. You walk on. After leaving your warm sanctuary, you head toward the administrative wing, where the castle steward and clerks spend their days doing the medieval version of paperwork, tallying grain, tracking rents, resolving disputes, worrying about firewood, and performing enough math to make modern calculators weep with sympathy. The moment you turn the corner into this wing, you're slapped by a new, aggressive chill, not a playful hallway breeze, not a shy, timid draft. This is the Arctic's cousin, the kind of cold that makes you blink twice and question whether you've accidentally stepped outside again. You pass a clerk clutching a quill in stiff fingers, muttering complaints into his parchment. Ink freezes. Fingers freeze. Brain freezes. He looks up at you with the blank expression of someone who has moved beyond suffering into quiet acceptance. And yet he keeps writing, because nobles expect records, receipts, and reports, even when the temperature turns parchment into crisp autumn leaves. A historical fact surfaces clearly. Medieval administrative rooms were often located in less heated parts of the castle because valuable documents were safer away from open flames. Fire destroyed records far more often than cold did. So the cold was a lesser evil unless you were the poor soul doing the writing. You step into the steward's chamber. A thin man sits at a large table covered in scrolls, his shoulders wrapped in 2 cloaks and a fox fur collar that looks like it gave up its warmth centuries ago. He glances up and greets you politely, then dives back into his writing. A small brazier sits by his chair, glowing faintly. You drift toward it instinctively, but the steward scoots his chair closer with surprising speed. "Sorry," he says. "This one's mine. Last winter the clerks tried to steal it." You nod in sympathy. Honestly, you might have stolen it too. 2 clerks argue quietly in the corner about the year's firewood supply. One insists they have enough for winter. The other insists they'll run out by mid-February and freeze in their sleep. Scholars still debate whether medieval firewood shortages were exaggerated in records or genuinely common. Judging by the expressions in this room, exaggeration seems unlikely. A clerk sneezes. Another clerk throws a wool scarf at him. "Keep your drafts to yourself," she scolds, not sarcastically, but literally. Everyone here fears drafts more than they fear disputes. You step into the connecting corridor, a long hallway lined with high, narrow windows. And here, the cold takes on a new personality. Sharp, ambitious, relentless. The wind slips through the shutters with the confidence of someone who has a master key to the entire castle. It hits your face, slips down your sleeves, nestles behind your knees. Remember that warm floor earlier? Yeah. This hallway is its evil twin. A servant sweeping the floor pauses to warm her hands under her armpits. She gives you a sympathetic grimace. "This wing's always cold," she says. "Been cold since forever. Will be cold forever." The way she says it, you believe her. You look through one of the narrow windows and see the courtyard below, now brighter with midday light. Snow flurries drift lazily across the air. Light, quiet, unhurried, almost peaceful. You watch them fall for a moment, feeling the softness in their movement contrasted by the sharpness in your bones. Behind you, the steward opens his door and calls to a clerk. "Bring more parchment," this one snapped. You look over and see the broken sheet in his hand, cracked cleanly in half from the cold. You try not to gasp, but internally you do. The cold in castles, you realize, isn't just a temperature. It's an antagonist. A character in the story. A force of nature that shapes routines, chores, architecture, and human behavior. You move on, walking deeper into the corridor. The cold doesn't relent, but neither do you. You've learned where the warmth hides, how the people survive, how the castle breathes. Your journey, somehow, is starting to feel less like wandering and more like understanding. You turn toward a small arched doorway marked by a carved wooden lintel. A thin draught seeps from underneath it, carrying the faint scent of beeswax and incense. This is the chapel, one of the castle's spiritual centers, and, tragically, one of its coldest. You push open the heavy door. It groans like it resents being disturbed. Inside, pale morning light filters through narrow stained glass slits, scattering muted colors across the stone floor. It would be beautiful if it weren't for the temperature, which sits somewhere between forgotten cellar and ancient glacier. Your breath fogs immediately. The chapel is quiet, so quiet that your footsteps echo like polite applause. A priest kneels at the small altar. Wrapped in so many layers he resembles an onion with a rosary. His hands clasp, gently, but his knuckles are red from cold. Even piety cannot warm them. He turns when he hears you, offering a serene smile that does not match the misery of his frozen extremities. "The Lord tests us," he whispers, "with drafts that come from nowhere." You nod respectfully. You don't argue with theology when your teeth are chattering. A historical fact crosses your mind. Medieval chapels were often unheated or lightly heated, partly out of religious humility, partly because fire near relics and tapestries was a catastrophic risk. So, worshippers practiced a sort of spiritual shivering. It was normal, holy, even. You wander toward a side alcove, where a set of rough wooden benches lines the wall. You lower yourself onto one, and instantly regret it. The bench is cold enough to etch its temperature into your soul. You sit anyway, because pride, and adjust your cloak to create at least one thin barrier. A young novice enters, carrying a candlestick. His hands tremble not with fear, but with cold. He lights the candles along the altar, their tiny flames bravely offering warmth in the same way a candle offers warmth in a walk-in freezer. Still, the flickering glow softens the room's edges. A strange and charming cultural tidbit surfaces. Some medieval churches used heated pebbles or tiles from ovens as hand warmers during winter mass. You glance around, half expecting to see baskets of warm stones. You don't, but you do notice two women near the back rubbing their hands together vigorously, whispering complaints about numb fingertips and frozen noses. From the corner of your eye, you catch movement a servant, quietly replacing the chapel's rushes with a fresh, fragrant batch. He spreads them carefully along the floor, the dried reeds rustling softly. The scent of lavender and mint drifts upward. In the medieval world, this wasn't just for cleanliness, it helped mask winter dampness. Some believed it improved the air in spiritually significant spaces. Historians still debate whether the scented rushes were more for comfort or tradition, but the smell is undeniably soothing. The priest finishes his prayer and stands slowly, joints creaking like old door hinges. He moves toward you and says in a warm voice that contradicts the environment, "You're welcome here any time, though do bring thicker socks next time." You thank him. He is not wrong. Before leaving, you step closer to the stained glass slit. The glass is icy to the touch, but its colors glow softly. Deep red, pale gold, muted blue. Outside, snowflakes drift lazily past, swirling like tiny dancers catching the morning light. Your shoulders loosen. Your breathing slows. Even the cold feels gentler here, thinner around the edges. Sacred spaces have a way of calming the bones, even when those bones are freezing. You place a hand over your heart in a brief gesture of respect, then turn toward the door. The hinges groan once again as you step back into the corridor, leaving the frosted air of the chapel behind. For a moment, you feel both chilled and grounded, touched by something ancient and quiet. Then a new draft slaps your cheek like a reminder that serenity has limits. You sigh, pull your cloak tighter, and continue walking. Descending the narrow stairs into the castle's lower hallways feels like willingly exploring the belly of a stone giant. The temperature drops step by step, the air growing thicker, heavier, colder. You wonder briefly if the castle has a personal vendetta against you, or perhaps this is simply medieval hospitality. They let you stay, but keep you humble. Your boots meet the packed earth floor of the undercroft, a broad, dimly lit space supported by heavy stone pillars that rise like ancient tree trunks. You inhale deeply. The air is earth-scented, damp, and cold enough to nip at the inside of your nose. The undercroft served many purposes throughout medieval life: storage, workshops, servant quarters, makeshift, meeting rooms, or all of the above, depending on the season. Today, several spaces are bustling despite the cold. To your left, you hear the rhythmic thunk of a cooper shaping wooden barrels. Each blow echoes through the stone chamber, bouncing around like it's trying to warm itself through repetition. The cooper's breath fogs with every exhale. His beard is frosted in tiny white crystals. "It's colder down here," he grunts without looking up. "Keeps the ale fresh. Pity about the people." You nod sympathetically, though your face might currently be frozen in place. A historical fact drifts across your mind. Some castle undercrofts stayed cold year-round because their thick stone walls and lack of windows trapped winter temperatures long after spring arrived. It was useful for food storage, and terrible for anyone trying to sleep or work down here. You wander farther. A group of women sits near a low wooden table, mending linens. They've huddled around a small clay brazier filled with glowing charcoal, one of the few sources of warmth allowed indoors. They lean toward it like planets orbiting a tiny sun. When one shifts even a little too far, the others follow her like a flock adjusting formation. One of the women glances up. "Mind your cloak," she says kindly. "Charcoal burns quick." You nod and give the brazier a respectful radius. You step into an adjoining chamber where smoked meats hang from beams overhead. The cold preserves them naturally. A butcher stands beneath the hanging lines, wrapped in a woolen apron, sharpening a knife with slow, rhythmic movements. He greets you with a nod, but doesn't speak. His breath curls upward, freezing into the air with each exhale. A peculiar cultural tidbit comes to mind. In some regions, winter was the main butchering season, not just because of cold storage convenience, but because cold temperatures kept flies away. Even in comfort, medieval people strategized around nature's cycles. You continue walking, guided by the echo of your steps. Your warm brick from earlier has cooled, offering only faint comfort inside your cloak. You shift it in your hands, remembering how glorious it once was, and debating whether to knock on the bakery ceiling for a refill. Another door leads into the castle's armory. Swords, shields, and chainmail hang neatly from racks. A young boy oils a leather strap while shivering violently. He glances at you. "The armor's cold," he says, as if this is shocking news. You touch a chainmail sleeve and recoil instantly. The boy grins. "Told you." A guard enters, strapping on a breastplate that probably hasn't been worn since July. He winces as it settles against his chest. "Armor in winter is the devil's handshake," he mutters. Historians still debate how often soldiers actually wore full armor indoors. But today, you're willing to believe anything people do to stay busy instead of thinking about the cold. You step deeper into the lower passageways, where torchlight flickers along damp walls. A thin stream of water trickles down one corner, freezing slightly around the edges. The cold here feels dense, rooted, old as if it's been sitting in this stone belly for centuries, watching winters come and go with patient persistence. Finally, you reach a storage alcove, where sacks of grain, baskets of apples, and barrels of preserved fish line the walls. A mouse darts across your path, pauses, and looks at you with pity before disappearing behind a crate. Even the mouse knows you're freezing. And yet, in this deep winter beneath the castle, you see something else too: resilience. People here work, laugh, complain, adapt. They dress in layers, share warmth, pass down tricks, and keep going. The cold is not a villain, just a constant companion they've learned to negotiate with. Your breath fogs once more as you turn toward the stairwell. Time to climb back into the upper world. You climb the stairs back to the surface world. And with each step the air grows a little less heavy, still cold, still sharp, but less damp and tomb-like. By the time you reach the main floor again, you feel a renewed appreciation for sunlight, even medieval sunlight, which tends to behave like a shy guest at a party. Present, polite, but not particularly helpful. You step into an outer walkway leading toward the bailey, and the first touch of midday sun brushes your face. It's weak, almost apologetic, but compared to the frozen undercroft, it feels like a warm handshake. You inhale deeply, the crisp air filling your lungs with something that almost resembles energy. People bustle about in the courtyard, their movements quick and purposeful. Midday is the hour when everyone tries to accomplish what requires dexterity, because fingers are least likely to freeze in this narrow window of time. The castle hums with life, guards shouting practice commands, dogs weaving between legs, servants carrying baskets of bread or firewood. You notice several laundry sheets strung on a line under the winter sun, stiffening slightly as the cold nips at their edges. A servant beats one with a wooden paddle, apparently the medieval version of fluff cycle. Every whack sends a puff of frosty dust into the air. Near the well, 2 children toss pebbles onto the ice, collecting around the edge. Each pebble skitters across with a crisp, musical sound. One child grins proudly at you, as if demonstrating a universal winter truth. Ice is irresistible. You walk toward the stable, where the warmth of animal breath drifts into the hallway. The scent of hay and warm fur is oddly comforting. A stable hand brushes down a massive horse, whose coat looks thick enough to classify as winter armor. The horse snorts softly, sending a warm cloud of steam into the air. You reach out, and after getting an approving nod from the stable hand, place your fingers against the horse's neck. Warmth radiates from the animal like a living hearth. Animals keep better in winter than people do, the stable hand says with a grin. They don't complain as much. You give the horse a gentle pat. The stable hand adds, some families in the village sleep near their animals when it gets real cold. Keeps everyone warm. A historical fact that surprises you less than it should. You wander along the castle wall, walk where sunlight hits the stone better. It's still cold, but the wind is quieter here, as if sunlit walls command a bit of respect. A guard leans on the parapet, watching the horizon. His breath rises in little clouds. Clear day, he says, without turning. Means colder night. You nod politely, because every medieval weather prediction so far has proven accurate, and also because he holds a spear. You continue along the wall walk until you reach a warm pocket formed where the sun hits directly. You stand there a moment, closing your eyes, letting the rays soak into your cheeks. The warmth is thin but steady, fleeting but real. You stretch your hands toward it, almost as though charging invisible solar panels hidden in your sleeves. A strange cultural tidbit drifts into your mind. Some medieval people believed midday sun cured melancholy, if you stood in it long enough. They called it taking the sun. You open your eyes and think, yes, that actually tracks. Modern people call it touching grass, but the principle is basically identical. Below you, the noise of the courtyard rises, crackling fires, clattering buckets, footsteps crunching on frost, a dog barking at something that's definitely not a threat. Over by the smithy, sparks fly as the blacksmith hammers glowing iron into shape. The heat from his forge pools into the surrounding air like a tiny oasis. You watch for a moment as he shapes the metal with precise, rhythmic blows. He pauses only to warm his hands near the coals before returning to his work. Historians still debate whether smithies were the warmest places in the castle, or simply the least miserable. But one glance at the glowing coals makes the answer feel obvious. You lean over the parapet, looking down at the world below the castle walls. A winter landscape of bare trees, smoky chimneys, and distant cottages. Thin white frost coats the fields like sugar dust on a pastry. You imagine the villagers inside their huts, crowded around their hearths, warming stones, layering wool, sipping hot broth. The castle may be impressive, but the villagers probably have warmer rooms. After lingering in the sun's gentle embrace, you begin moving again, following the walkway back toward the inner yard. Your cheeks tingle from the cold and the mild heat. You press your warm brick, now lukewarm, tragically, against your fingers, and soldier on. You feel the castle deepening around you, the rhythms of daily life settling like layers of wool. The cold is still there, persistent as ever, but you're learning its patterns, its tricks, its quiet negotiations. The day isn't over. And neither is the cold. You make your way toward a covered cloister. A long, narrow walkway forming a square around a small internal courtyard. These cloisters often serve as the castle's quieter spaces, where servants pass through and clerics meditate, and where drafts hang out recreationally. You step beneath the wooden beams of the cloister and immediately feel the temperature drop again. It's not the brutal cold of the tower or the undercroft, more like a persistent reminder that still air can be just as chilling as wind. In the center of the courtyard, a small herb garden lies dormant. Frost clings to the edges of the raised beds like delicate lace. A gardener kneels beside a patch of sturdy winter herbs. Sage, thyme, winter savory. He touches each plant with care, checking for frost damage. "They're tough," he says. "Tougher than we are." You believe him. A historical fact surfaces. Medieval herb gardens were essential for cooking and medicine year-round. Some herbs survived winter, outdoors. Others were grown indoors, near windows. During harsh winters, these little gardens were lifelines. As you walk farther down the cloister, you pass a group of children learning letters from a kindly old tutor. Each child wears so many layers, they resemble small, puffy bundles of ambition. One girl raises her hand and asks if frostbite can happen to fingers that are doing letters. The tutor hesitates, then replies gently, "Not if you keep your gloves on, dear." The children nod solemnly, as though engaged in the most serious scholarly pursuit of the century. A few steps ahead, a pair of servants hang newly washed linens on a line stretched beneath the cloister roof. The sheets flap in the faint winter breeze, crisp, stiff, and crackling faintly. One servant hums a tune while working, breath fogging with each note. "Drying takes forever in winter," she mutters. "Sometimes they freeze before they dry." She flicks a corner of a sheet to illustrate. It responds, with the stiffness of thin wood. She sighs. "We bring them inside, thaw them, dry them again. Never ends." You nod sympathetically. Laundry is the universal burden of humanity. A peculiar cultural tidbit floats to mind. In some medieval regions, people hung clothes in winter, not expecting them to dry, but to freeze impurities so they could shake the stiffness out. You glance at the rigid sheets and think, yes, this tracks. Toward the far end of the cloister, a monk stands near a brazier, filled with glowing charcoal. He holds his hands out to the warmth, turning them slowly as though roasting marshmallows that don't exist yet. He sees you and gives a peaceful smile. "Cold drives contemplation," he says, "and contemplation drives cold away." You appreciate the philosophy, even if your fingers disagree. He picks up a small book from a wooden bench and returns to reading, his brow serene despite the icy air. You find yourself wondering if monks simply transcended temperature through sheer willpower. As you continue walking, a gust sneaks through the open arches of the cloister and wraps around you like a mischievous ghost. It tugs at your cloak, slips around your knees, whispers along your collar. You shiver but carry on, because medieval life is 10% tasks and 90% tolerating drafts. You watch from below as a servant crosses the cloister's upper gallery, carrying a basket of warmed stones to recharge heating bricks around the castle. She moves quickly, determined to lose as little heat as possible before the stones cool. You admire her strategy. At the next corner of the cloister, a group of men mend nets and baskets. Their fingers move deftly despite the cold, but you can see the stiffness in their knuckles. One man pauses to blow warm air onto his hands. "Fishing tomorrow," he says to another. "Water will be colder than this isle." The other man nods grimly. Better hope the sun shows up. Historians still debate whether medieval cloisters, they were designed more for meditation or practicality. But one thing is certain, they were never warm. Beautiful, peaceful, functional, but decidedly not warm. You stop for a moment beneath one of the arches, gazing into the courtyard. Thin rays of light slip through the wooden beams overhead, painting faint stripes on the frosted ground. You breathe deeply, letting the cool air settle inside you, not harsh now, just present. You feel a small, strange peace, cold but peaceful. You leave the cloister behind and follow a narrow path toward the outer edge of the castle grounds. The air grows sharper again, and the sky settles into that pale, wintry brightness that feels both awake and asleep at the same time. Ahead lies the kitchen garden, normally bursting with life in warmer months, but now subdued under the stern hand of winter. You step through the wooden gate, which creaks as though announcing your arrival to the empty beds within. Frost glimmers across the soil like a thin layer of powdered crystal. The air here smells faintly of earth and cold metal, with a whisper of distant wood smoke. A few hardy vegetables remain: kale, leeks, and winter cabbage standing tall and stubborn, refusing to surrender to the season. A gardener bends over one of the kale plants, trimming the outer leaves with a knife. His nose is red, his breaths are short, and his wool hat looks like it has seen at least 20 winters. He glances up and gives you a crooked smile. "Cold keeps the flavor sharp," he says. "Biting cold makes sweet cabbage." You nod as though this is common knowledge. He returns to his work, humming faintly to himself. A historical fact floats into your mind. Medieval households relied heavily on winter vegetables like leeks, onions, and cabbages, not only because they survived the season, but because they stored well in cool cellars. A fresh vegetable in winter was a quiet luxury. Farther along the garden path, you spot a small wooden structure, half buried in the ground, a root cellar. You tug the handle and open the door, feeling a musty, cold breath rise from below. Inside, shelves hold baskets of carrots, turnips, onions, and apples stored carefully in straw. The cold preserves them. But stepping down inside feels like entering the spiritual cousin of the undercroft. Damp, icy, patient. You close the door quickly before the chill can seep any deeper into your bones. Near the garden wall, a row of beehives stands silent. Cloth wraps are tied around them for insulation. A peculiar cultural tidbit comes to mind. Medieval beekeepers sometimes sang to their hives in winter, believing bees needed reassurance through the cold months. You whisper a soft hello to them, just in case, and continue on. A maid collects dried herbs from a lean-to shed nearby. She carries bunches of rosemary, sage, and bay leaves in a woven basket. When she sees you, she explains, "These go to the kitchen." Helps keep the pottage interesting. She lowers her voice. Even in winter, nobody wants boring pottage. She winks and walks off, trailing the scent of dried rosemary. You approach the back corner of the garden, where a small compost heap steams gently in the cold. The warmth is faint but noticeable, nature's quiet reminder that decay, oddly enough, generates heat. You place your hand above it and feel a soft, earthy warmth rising like a whispered secret. A few chickens peck around the compost, unbothered by the cold. One of them pauses to stare at you with a knowing expression. You stare back, wondering if chickens are simply judgmental across all centuries, or if you have somehow personally offended this particular bird. Suddenly, a gust of wind sweeps across the garden, rattling the dry stalks and sending tiny whirlwinds of frost spinning along the path. You brace yourself, tugging your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The gardener, near the cabbages, laughs. "Wind finds you wherever you go," he calls. "Best not take it personally." You smile at that, it's hard not to. Medieval wisdom is practical, slightly sarcastic, and always aware of drafts. As you leave the garden, you glance back at the orderly beds, the frosted herbs, the silent beehives. Winter has pressed its palm over the land, but everything here waits patiently, knowing warmth will return in time. Just not today. You turn toward a low stone building near the castle wall, the workshops. Even before reaching the doorway, you hear the rhythmic thud of mallets, the scrape of metal on wood, and the soft murmur of artisans at work. The air here smells of sawdust, leather, and faint traces of smoke, a warm blend that feels almost cozy. Almost. You step inside the workshop hall, and the temperature jumps, not warm, exactly, but warmer than anywhere outdoors. A fire burns in a small iron brazier at the far end. Several workers are crowded around it, warming their hands, elbows, tools, anything that can reasonably be warmed without causing structural damage. A carpenter hammers wooden pegs into a thick table leg. His breath fogs with every exhale, but he works with steady hands. "Cold keeps the wood honest," he mutters. "Doesn't warp as much." You decide this is either profound insight or a coping mechanism. Both seem valid. You pass a loom where a weaver sits, her feet tapping the wooden pedals rhythmically. She wears 2 wool hoods, one stacked over the other, like a medieval fashion experiment. The fabric she weaves is dense and warm-looking, the kind of cloth that could make winter bearable. She glances up. "This weave is for cloaks," she explains. "Good wool. Keeps out wind. Mostly." She pauses, depending on the wind. You nod. Wind has its own opinions. A historical fact slips gently into place. Wool production and weaving were essential winter occupations, often keeping castle inhabitants warm both literally and economically. Thicker winter weaves were prized. The next bench, a leather worker shapes a pair of winter boots. Thick leather, fur lining, sturdy soles. He holds the half-finished boot toward you. Try standing on stone floors all day without these, he says. You have no intention of trying. He chuckles and returns to stitching. Nearby, two apprentices work together repairing a cracked shield. One holds the wooden frame steady, while the other fits a new leather covering over its surface. They complain about cold fingers, cold tools, cold glue, cold wood, basically everything except cold attitudes, which remain surprisingly cheerful. You wander deeper into the workshop where a basket maker weaves reeds into tight spirals. His hands move expertly, despite the cold that surely numbs his fingertips. Winter work keeps the heart warm, he says, not looking up. Not the hands, but the heart. He smiles wryly. You return the smile. A peculiar cultural tidbit arises. Winter was a time for indoor crafts, spinning, mending, repairing tools, activities that filled the long cold months with productivity. Medieval life didn't pause for weather. It simply adjusted. You pause beside another brazier, soaking in the glow. It's a small comfort, but enough to take the sharpness out of your bones. A young apprentice sidles up beside you, extending his hands toward the heat. Master says working near the brazier makes us lazy, he whispers. I say working away from it makes us frozen. He glances around, then sneaks another inch closer to the warmth. You pretend not to notice. In the corner of the workshop, a large rack holds drying wool dyed in deep winter colors: rust red, forest green, warm brown. The colors look like the palette of a cozy blanket. You run your fingers through the thick bundles and feel their softness. You imagine them being sewn into cloaks, sleeves, linings, layers upon layers against the cold. The workshop door opens suddenly, and a gust of frigid air cuts through the warmth, like a rude guest entering without knocking. All the artisans groan in unison. "Close it!" someone shouts. "You're letting the heat escape." The apprentice slams it shut. Historians still debate how effective interior workshops were at staying warm, but judging by the artisans clustered around the brazier like worshippers at a tiny fire altar, the answer appears to be warm enough. You take one last breath of warmish air, feeling it settle into your lungs like a small gift, before stepping back outside. A winter breeze immediately questions your life choices. By the time you step back into the main courtyard, the winter light has shifted toward afternoon, still pale, still cold, but carrying a hint of gold that glows gently against the castle stone. People move with a new urgency now. Evening approaches, and in a medieval castle, that means two things: finishing work before daylight disappears, and preparing the great hall for the warmest gathering of the day. You follow, the flow of activity back toward the great hall. As the doors swing open, a wave of warmth that's almost theatrical rolls outward. Not hot, not even truly warm, but compared to the wind outside, it's heavenly. A large fire has been stoked in the central hearth, and the flames leap high, crackling with determined cheer. Servants bustle around you, spreading fresh rushes across the floor, shaking out tapestries, and carrying candles to the long wooden tables. The scent of evergreen branches laid along the walls for winter fragrance mixes with smoke and warm bread. It feels festive, though you suspect this is just what survival looks like dressed up for the evening. You step closer to the hearth. The glow paints your face in soft oranges and golds. Your cloak begins to thaw slightly, releasing a faint scent of damp wool. A servant laughs as she passes you. "A thawing cloak smells worse than a wet dog," she jokes. You sniff discreetly. She might be right. A historical fact floats in. The Great Hall wasn't just for feasting. It was the castle's social, political, and thermal heart. When the hearth blazed, the hall became the warmest room available to most residents. Near the high table, a steward directs servants arranging platters and cups. He moves with the precision of a man who has recited the same set of instructions every day for 20 years. Candles there. Keep them away from the tapestry. Bread on the left, wine on the right. The Lord likes his feet facing the fire. You wonder if the Lord's feet have their own social standing. At the far end of the hall, a musician tunes a small harp, plucking strings with numb fingers. He winces occasionally when a note buzzes out of tune. "Strings hate cold," he mutters. "Everything hates cold." He keeps tuning anyway, the stubborn determination of an artist refusing to be conquered by weather. You watch as a young servant wheels in a cart carrying clay pots simmering with evening pottage. Steam billows up, making the air smell rich and earthy. You catch a hint of sage, barley, and something roasted. Your stomach considers filing a formal complaint about hunger. On one of the side benches, a group of children warm their hands by the fire. One boy holds up his palms and declares, "My fingers are alive again." The others nod with identical seriousness. You sympathize. Then you notice something odd. A wooden screen being set up behind the high table. A servant unfolds it carefully, placing it between the Lord's bench and the draught coming from a nearby doorway. A weird but practical cultural tidbit. Portable screens like this were used to block gusts and trap heat during meals. Medieval heating strategy often involved simply getting in the way of wind. One servant pauses to chat with you. "It's a good fire tonight," she says proudly. "Used dry wood from last summer." You nod appreciatively. She adds, "Last week we burned wet logs, smoked everyone like herrings." She wrinkles her nose. As you take in the warm hall, you feel your shoulders lower, your breath slow. The warmth is still imperfect, uneven, smoky, slightly stinging the eyes, but it feels like a haven, a gathering place, a reward for enduring the day's drafts. Then, in a moment of pure irony, the giant oak door at the back of the hall swings open, letting in a blast of cold air. Every person within 10 feet groans simultaneously. A servant racing past mutters, "Close it, close it, close it." And when it finally slams shut, the collective sigh of relief is almost spiritual. You step away from the hearth and stroll along the length of the hall, admiring the shadows dancing across the walls. Remember earlier when you first entered this hall wrapped in morning frost? Now, the space feels like a living creature, a warm, breathing refuge ready to carry the castle into night. You follow a narrow passageway that leads toward the castle's residential chambers. The stones under your boots grow colder again, reminding you that warmth is not permanent, just an occasional visitor. The corridor is dim, lit only by a few candles mounted in iron sconces. Their flames flicker uncertainly in tiny drafts that seep around corners. As you turn a bend, you see two servants carrying bundles of freshly warmed bricks wrapped in cloth. One glances at you and grins. "Bed warmers," she explains. "Stone today. Last night we used heated sand." You nod like a connoisseur of medieval thermal strategies. You step into a small antechamber that leads into a noble's bedroom. The contrast between the great hall's glow and this chamber's chill is stark enough to give you emotional whiplash. The room is quiet, lit by a single candle whose flame struggles valiantly against the cold. The bed is the first thing you notice, a massive wooden structure with heavy curtains, drawn around it. The curtains are thick wool or velvet, dyed a deep, warm red. They hang like a protective fortress around the mattress. A strange cultural tidbit comes to mind. Medieval bed curtains weren't just decoration, they trapped body heat, turning a drafty room into a microclimate. Families of all social statuses used them. Two servants pull back the bed curtains, revealing heaps of blankets, furs, and quilts layered like geological strata. One carefully tucks a warm brick between the sheets. Steam rises faintly from the linen. "Climb in quickly," one servant says to you with a wink. "Don't let the heat escape." She's joking, but also not joking at all. A historical fact floats into your memory. Even wealthy nobles often slept fully dressed in winter chemise, woolen layers, stockings, and sometimes even caps. You can practically hear the logic. Why remove warmth when you worked so hard to build it? You run a hand over the thick quilts. They feel heavy, but comforting, like a hug from a slightly stern grandmother. In the corner of the room, a small brazier offers what might be charitably described as encouraging warmth. A servant stirs the coals with a poker. "Not too much," she murmurs. "Smoke gets trapped by the curtains." You nod. She nods. You both share a moment of mutual understanding. Warmth requires compromise. You notice a pair of woolen socks hanging near the brazier. Someone has placed warmed stones inside them, an ingenious trick to preheat the toes. You try not to cry with admiration. A noblewoman enters the room, wrapped in 2 cloaks and looking like she is in a committed relationship with winter. She greets you gently and begins preparing for the night, layering blankets with the precision of someone who knows the stakes. Cold finds you even in sleep, she says. Best to meet it with preparation. She settles onto the bed and pulls the curtains around herself, disappearing into her private warmth, cocoon. The room instantly feels colder by comparison. You step back into the antechamber, where another servant hands you a small warming pan with hot coals sealed inside. For your own bed, she says kindly. You accept it, feeling the gentle radiance seep through the metal. But before you use it, you take one last look around the room. The bed curtains glowing faintly in candlelight, the carefully layered quilts, the soft crackle of charcoal, the faint scent of wool. Everything here, every trick, every layer, every warm stone is the result of centuries of people learning how to survive winter, inside walls built for defense, not comfort. You exhale a slow, warm breath and step back into the corridor. You follow the passageway deeper into the residential wing, but instead of turning toward another noble chamber, you move in the opposite direction toward the servants' quarters. The corridor narrows, the stone walls more worn, the ceiling lower. A few candles flicker in iron holders, their flames bending toward invisible drafts. The cold here is different, less dramatic than the Undercroft's icy presence, but sharper, thinner, like needles of air pricking your skin. You step into a long dormitory lined with simple wooden cots, each one piled with wool blankets in mismatched colors and layers. The room hums faintly with quiet conversation. A handful of servants sit on their beds, rubbing their hands together, stitching torn clothes, or sharing a pot of very thin, very hopeful evening broth. A young maid notices you and gestures toward an empty cot near the corner. That one's closest to the wall, she says, colder, but less snoring. You thank her sincerely. Snoring is timeless. You sit on the cot and immediately feel the chill of the wall behind it. Cold stone, your ever-present medieval companion. You shift forward slightly, choosing to maintain a cautious alliance with the temperature. A historical fact appears in your mind. Servants often slept several to a room, not because of lack of space, but because shared body heat was a survival strategy. Privacy was a luxury. Warmth was not negotiable. Across the room, a small brazier sits in the center, glowing faintly. It barely warms the immediate space, but everyone has subtly rearranged themselves in a ring around it. A servant stirs the coals and sighs. Wish we had 2, he says. But last winter someone fainted from the smoke. Steward won't risk it. Another servant laughs softly. He'd rather we freeze than pass out. They nod in practical agreement. Medieval safety regulations, still warmer than the room. Nearby, an older washerwoman sews a rip in her wool sleeve. Her fingers move slowly but precisely. Make do and mend, she murmurs. That's how we weather winter. You feel those words settle somewhere deep. A peculiar cultural tidbit spreads quietly through your thoughts. In some castles, servants slept with warm stones wrapped in, cloth tucked at their feet, or even held against their chests, like small pets of radiant heat. You see it happening now. One young boy slips a warm brick into his blankets, with a relieved sigh, looking as though he's discovered joy itself. You wander to the far end of the chamber, where a group of older servants play a quiet dice game on a woolen mat. Their laughter is soft, almost muffled by layers of scarves. One looks at you and grins. Cold keeps us awake, he says, and the game keeps us warm. You raise an eyebrow. He chuckles. Well, keeps us distracted from the cold. One woman lifts her cot's blankets to show a pile of straw beneath. Fresh stuffing, she says proudly. Traded a jar of beer for it. You nod. Straw doesn't look impressive, but compared to bare boards, it's a love letter. On the opposite wall, someone has hung an extra thick tapestry depicting a hunting scene. It's slightly crooked, but you can feel the difference the moment you stand near it, a pocket of stillness in the otherwise shivering room. Helps with drafts, a servant explains, and the Lord threw it out last year. Said the deer looked too smug. You glance at the deer in question. It does indeed look smug. Your attention shifts to the small window set high in the wall. It's shuttered, but thin icicles cling to the edges. The wind outside whispers through the cracks. One servant, wrapped in so many layers, he resembles a very determined cabbage, reaches up and stuffs a wool cloth into the gap. "Winter guests," he mutters, uninvited. The entire room feels alive, tired, cold, humble, but quietly resilient. Here, warmth is found in numbers, in shared stories, in the dull radiance of a single brazier, and in the knowledge that everyone is fighting the same winter battle. You take one final look around. The dim glow on tired faces, the soft crackle of charcoal, the shared blankets, the small laughter. Then you step back into the corridor, cold, yes, but carrying with you a strange, steady warmth born from human company. You climb a narrow stair tower that leads to the battlements. Each step feels colder than the last, as if the night air is descending to meet you halfway. When you push open the small wooden door at the top, a gust of icy wind hits you with immediate authority. The world outside is transforming into night. The sky is a deepening shade of blue, the first stars flickering like cautious candles overhead. The moon hangs low and pale, dusting the stone walls in silvery light. You wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders and step out onto the wall walk. The wind is relentless up here, sharp, fast, purposeful. It sweeps around the towers, whistling through crenels and merlons, with a pitch that sounds almost musical. Your breath fogs instantly and drifts away like a small cloud fleeing the cold. A guard stands a short distance ahead, leaning against his spear. His cloak whips behind him, like a flag in the wind. When he sees you, he snorts a laugh. "Didn't expect company up here," he says. "Cold enough to scare the warmth out of your bones." You nod, because speaking risks losing precious heat. He gives you a sympathetic smile. "Best trick for warmth?" he says. "Don't stop moving." And indeed, he begins pacing his section of the wall, walk in steady loops. You join him, your footsteps crunching lightly against the frost gathering on the stone. A historical fact arrives with perfect timing. Night watch duty on castle walls was brutally cold, especially in winter. Guards used wool cloaks, fur caps, heated stones, and constant pacing to fight the chill. Falling asleep wasn't just forbidden, it was dangerous. You pause at a corner turret, where two guards share a small brazier shielded from the wind. The coals glow dimly, barely warm enough to thaw fingertips. One guard holds his hands over it and sighs. "Wish we had more charcoal," he mutters, "but the steward says we used too much last week warming the granary." The second guard grumbles. "Better warm grain than warm guards, apparently." You offer a sympathetic shrug, which they accept with dignity. A peculiar cultural tidbit drifts in. Some watchmen chewed on ginger or garlic during cold nights, believing it heated the blood. One guard beside you seems to demonstrate this tradition, chewing something sharp-smelling with absolute conviction. You walk toward the parapet and lean slightly over the edge. The village below glows softly with scattered firelight, tiny hearths flickering like constellations. Smoke curls from thatched roofs, rising into the crisp air. Beyond that lies a dark countryside dusted with frost, quiet and serene. The view is beautiful, but the cold is cutting. A gust of wind blasts across the wall walk, slapping your face and yanking at your cloak. Your eyes water. One guard shouts over the wind. "The walls teach humility." You believe him immediately. Moving to the next section, you find another guard perched on a stone bench, rubbing his hands together briskly. His helmet sits beside him on the bench, metal too cold to wear, unless absolutely necessary. "Warm head, cold hands," he jokes. "Cold head, warm hands, can't have both." You smile, though your lips feel slightly numb. The guard nods toward a small wooden box tucked beside the door to the tower stairs. "Heat stones inside," he explains. "We switch them out with ones from the kitchen. Doesn't last long, but better than nothing." He hands you one. It's warmish. Miraculously warmish. You hold it gratefully. Historians still debate whether such heating stones were widespread or occasional luxuries, but at this moment, you're firmly in the luxury camp. You continue along the battlements, each step crunching on thin frost. The moonlight reflects off the stone, creating a silver path ahead. The wind whistles through arrow slits with a hollow, mournful sound. Then, unexpectedly, there is stillness. You reach a corner, sheltered from the wind by an angled wall. Here, the cold is quieter. You stop. You breathe. You let the still night wrap around you. Below, the castle glows from its many hearths, small warm islands in a cold world. You stay a moment longer, taking in the peaceful darkness. Then, with your warm stone cooling in your hands, you turn back toward the stair tower and descend into the castle once more. As you descend from the battlements, your fingers still tingling from the cold, you follow the familiar scent of smoke and herbs drifting through the lower corridors. The castle has begun shifting into its night rhythm, quieter, slower, softer. But the kitchens remain alive with warmth and motion. You slip through the heavy wooden door into the kitchen chamber and are immediately enveloped in air that feels almost luxurious compared to the biting cold outside. The hearth flames roar with renewed evening strength, casting golden light across clay pots and wooden shelves. Steam rises from simmering pots, curling toward the beams like sleepy ghosts. The kitchen at night is a different world, still busy, but with a gentler tempo. A handful of cooks stand around a table, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread. Their hands are dusted with flour, and their cheeks glow from the fire's heat. One looks up at you and grins broadly. "Come to warm yourself, have you?" he asks. You don't even pretend otherwise. He laughs. "Wise choice. If I didn't work here, I'd sleep here." And honestly, you get it. A large cauldron hangs over the central fire, filled with the last of the evening's pottage. A young kitchen maid stirs it lazily, humming a tune that wanders up and down the scale like a warm breeze. "Keeps it from sticking," she says when she notices your gaze, "and keeps my hands warm." She demonstrates by alternating between stirring and holding her fingers near the fast flame. A historical fact floats gently into place. Kitchens were often the warmest rooms in a castle, not because they were designed for comfort, but because they needed constant fire for food preparation. Servants sometimes slept nearby in winter to escape the bitter cold of other chambers. At the far wall, a baker pulls small loaves from a side oven. Steam billows as he opens the door. He taps the top of one loaf with his knuckle. "Perfect," he murmurs. "Warm food keeps us alive. Warm smells keep us sane." He hands you a crusty heel of bread, still hot enough to sting your fingers just a little. You bite into it and feel warmth spread through your chest like slow sunlight. Bread has rarely tasted so good. You notice a clay jug sitting beside the hearth. A cook explains, "Warm ale for the watchman." She lifts it, testing its weight, helps keep the frost out of their bones. She hands it off to a boy who hurries out the door, carrying warmth through the castle like a courier of comfort. A peculiar cultural tidbit drifts in. Medieval kitchens sometimes doubled as makeshift infirmaries during winter nights. Warmth was medicine when herbs and prayers weren't enough. You glance toward a bench, where an elderly servant sits soaking her hands in warm water. Her face relaxes with relief. "Bless this fire," she murmurs. You wander to the back corner, where smoked meats hang in neat rows, casting long shadows on the walls. The faint scent of salt and wood smoke lingers in the air. A cat sits beneath the rack, tail curling around its paws, eyes half closed with contentment. It has clearly claimed the best warm spot in the room, closest to the hearth, without technically being in the fire. Someone nearby chuckles. "He lives here more than we do." The cat yawns, confirming the accusation. Another servant enters carrying a basket of heated stones wrapped in cloth. "Fresh warmers from the oven," she announces proudly. A small cluster of people gathers to take one. You accept one too. It radiates a steady, comforting heat through the fabric. "Use it quick," she warns. "They cool fast." Despite the warmth, fatigue hangs over the room. People move more slowly now. Voices soften. Laughter becomes gentle, almost sleepy. Even the fire crackles with a muffled, contented rhythm, as if it too is preparing for rest. Scholars still debate whether kitchens truly served as emotional centers of medieval life, but watching these cooks share warmth, bread, and quiet conversation, it's hard to imagine a cozier place in the castle. You take a final look around. Glowing flames, steaming pots, warm bread, tired faces, illuminated in amber light. It feels safe here, human, tender. You step back into the corridor, carrying your warm stone and a little piece of borrowed comfort. You make your way up a narrow staircase toward the upper solar, the private sitting room used by the lord and his family. Earlier, it had been mild, warmed by afternoon sun. Now, with night fully settled, it has transformed into a chamber of faint, flickering shadows and carefully curated warmth. When you enter, the solar greets you with the gentle glow of a modest hearth fire. Not large, nothing like the Great Hall, but steady, well-tended, radiating a soft heat that pools into the room. Thick curtains have been drawn across the windows, turning the space into a sheltered pocket in the middle of the castle's winter shell. A nobleman sits near the hearth, wrapped in a deep blue wool robe lined with fur. His feet rest on a low stool, where a warm brick hides beneath a folded cloth. He glances up as you enter. "Cold evening," he says matter-of-factly, "though warmer here than in my own hall." You suspect he's not exaggerating. A noblewoman sits beside him working a piece of embroidery by candlelight. Her hair is tucked beneath a soft linen cap, and she wears a cloak even indoors. "The fire fights hard," she says gently, "but the drafts fight harder." She gestures toward the drawn curtains. "We do what we can." A historical fact warms your thoughts. The solar was often the warmest private space in a castle, designed for comfort rather than defense. Smaller than the Great Hall, easier to heat, and usually positioned where the sun hit during the day. Still not modern heating, but closer. The nobleman pours warm spiced wine into 2 cups. The scent of cloves and honey drifts through the room. He offers you a cup, which you accept gratefully. The warmth seeps into your hands, then into your chest as you sip. It tastes like winter's answer to comfort. A small dog sleeps near the hearth, curled into a ball so tight it resembles a furry cushion. Occasionally, it twitches in a dream, pawing at something invisible. The noblewoman nudges it gently, with her foot. "Even he feels the cold," she murmurs. A peculiar cultural tidbit surfaces. Lapdogs weren't just companions, they were tiny, mobile heating devices. Noblewomen often kept them close during winter for warmth. You glance at the dog again and think, yes, that makes perfect sense. On a side table sits a polished brass reflector positioned behind a candle. It focuses light into the room like a miniature lantern. The nobleman notices your gaze. "Helps the eyes," he explains, and fools the mind into feeling warmer. You smile. Humans have always been creative. The fire crackles softly. Shadows dance along the carved wooden beams. A servant steps in and adds another log, ensuring the warmth lasts a little longer. She bows lightly before slipping out again. You walk toward the window curtains, curious. When you part them slightly, a thin beam of moonlight slips in, and with it, a thread of cold so sharp it touches your bones. You let the curtain fall back into place quickly. The noblewoman laughs softly behind you. "The castle breathes through its stones," she says. "Even the curtains can't silence it." You return to the hearth, grateful for its gentle glow. The heat feels softer now, like a blanket spreading through your muscles. The spiced wine warms your throat, and the flicker of flame slows your thoughts into long, peaceful stretches. Scholars still debate how much time nobles truly spent in their solars during winter. Some say nearly all day. Others say only evenings. Tonight, this room feels like a sanctuary, small, warm, intimate. You sip your wine, let the warmth settle in your chest, and breathe deeply. The sounds of the castle fade to quiet, hums distant footsteps, muffled voices, the wind tapping against shutters. The nobleman raises his cup slightly. "To surviving the cold," he says. You raise yours in return. Outside, the wind continues to roam the castle. But in this moment, in this room, you are wrapped in a pocket of medieval warmth. You leave the warm cocoon of the solar and step back into the corridor, where the cold greets you with the enthusiasm of a dog that has been waiting all day, except this dog is made of wind and disappointment. Your cloak rustles as a draft slips under it, and you pull it tighter before heading toward the central staircase. The castle has quieted. Most of the hallways now echo with a softer rhythm. Distant footsteps, the muffled clatter of a bucket being set down, a sleepy murmur from servants finishing their final tasks. The air feels thick and still, as though the castle itself is exhaling after a long day. You walk through a narrow corridor where torches sputter with low blue flames, sign that they're near the end of their oil. One of them flickers dramatically, threatening to die. You slow your pace, giving it a polite, encouraging look. It rallies slightly, A servant carrying a handful of candles passes you. "Last rounds," she whispers. "Have to check all the flames." She nods toward the nearest sconce. "Can't risk one of these going out before bedtime. Too dark, too cold." You understand instantly. Light and warmth are siblings in this world. You protect one to keep the other alive. A historical fact settles into your thoughts. Castle nights were often pitch black, with only a few guarded flames burning in hallways and chambers. Darkness wasn't just an inconvenience. It shaped how people moved, worked, and thought. Night belonged to silence, to rest, to caution. You step into the great hall again, and the fire has burned down into a soft, pulsing glow. The stones around the hearth radiate a lingering heat that embraces the benches and walls like a final gift. A couple of guards linger near the embers, rubbing their hands slowly, speaking in low tones. One offers you a nod of tired camaraderie. The hall feels peaceful now, empty, quiet, resting. You wander toward the door that leads to the inner ward. Outside, the courtyard lies under a thin film of frost, shimmering in moonlight. The sky above is clear, jewel dark, sprinkled with stars you rarely see clearly in the modern world. You step out into the open air, or what passes for it. Anyway, the cold wraps you instantly, sharp and crystalline. Your breath fogs thickly. The snow crunches under your boots with a sound like distant whispers. A pair of stable hands cross the courtyard, carrying buckets of warm mash for the horses. The animals snort with appreciation, their warm breath mingling with the cold night air. A stable dog trots beside them, tail swishing in lazy arcs, unbothered by the cold. You notice something curious. Thin wisps of smoke rise from narrow slits high along the outer walls. A servant sees your gaze and explains, "Flues," from the kitchen vents. You watch the warm smoke slip into the sky, pale and fleeting. It feels like watching the castle dream. A peculiar cultural tidbit surfaces. Some castle residents believed that sleeping in total silence was unlucky. They preferred soft noise, crackling embers, rustling straw, distant animals, believing it kept bad spirits away and reminded them they weren't alone. You listen carefully now. The night is full of these gentle sounds. You step beneath an archway and take one last look at the sky. Stars shimmer above the towers, unbothered by cold or wind. For a moment, you feel suspended between centuries, your breath mingling with the breath of people who stood here long before you. The castle is dim, cold, imperfect, but it feels alive. Your eyelids grow heavy, your steps slow. This day has been long, this winter, endless, this stone fortress, full of stories. It's time to find your own warm corner for the night. You turn toward the residential wing, ready for rest. You enter your small chamber, modest, stone-lined, narrow but somehow more welcoming than it was this morning. The moonlight filters through the shutter cracks, painting silver, stripes across the floor. The air is cold, yes, but it carries a gentler chill now, softened by everything you've learned, everything you've felt. The bed awaits you. Thick blankets, a soft woolen quilt, a warm brick wrapped in cloth resting against the pillow. You hold the brick with both hands, letting its fading heat seep into your palms. Warmth is a fragile guest in this castle, rare, fleeting, but today, you've earned it. You pull back the blankets and climb beneath them quickly, trapping what little warmth you can. The weight of the wool settles around you, heavy, protective. You tuck your feet close to the still warm stone and feel the chill in your bones begin to loosen. Your room is quiet. The only sounds are the soft sigh of wind against the window shutters, the faint crackle of a dying ember in the corridor brazier, and your own slow breathing rising into the dark. You feel yourself unwinding, breath by breath. A historical fact drifts gently into your mind. Medieval sleepers often rested in pairs or groups, through winter family members sharing body heat to survive. Here, alone in this small room, you share warmth instead with blankets, bricks, memory, and the lingering comfort of 1,000 human hands that spent centuries learning how to live with the cold. Your eyelids flutter. You think of the warm garden patches above the bakehouse, the steaming kitchens, the quiet chapel with its pale stained glass, the bustling workshops, the wind-bitten battlements under the moon, the soft glow of the solar, the laughter in the servants' quarters, the hearth in the great hall, the heart of the castle. All these places, All these people, all their clever ways of staying warm without a single fireplace in most rooms. You feel their ingenuity wrap around you like one last woolen layer. Your breath settles into a slow, steady rhythm. And now, let the world grow softer. Let yourself sink deeper into the blankets of this imagined room. Picture the stone walls fading into soft shadow, their cold edges smoothing away as the quiet night folds around you. The castle has settled, every hallway tucked beneath the hush of winter darkness. The wind becomes gentle, brushing the shutters like a careful hand. You breathe slowly, feeling the heaviness of the day melt from your shoulders. The last embers glow somewhere far down the hall, their warmth drifting toward you in memory only soft, faint, comforting. Imagine that glow finding its way beneath your blankets, warming your feet, then your legs, then your chest, as though the entire castle has gathered its warmth into this one peaceful room, just for you. Outside, the stars hang steady above the towers, patient and distant. The moonlight softens the world in pale silver, and every sound has quieted into a soft, rhythmic lull. The rustle of straw, the low murmur of a distant guard, the contented sigh of the castle as it rests for the night. Even the cold seems slower now, gentler in its approach, like a tide retreating from the shore. You breathe in, slow and deep, and out, even slower. Your thoughts drift like soft snowflakes, light and unhurried. Nothing asks anything of you now. There are no drafts to chase, no chores to finish, no steps left in the long shadowed corridors. Only warmth, only stillness, only the comforting sense of being held inside something ancient and quiet. Let the castle cradle you. Let the blankets gather close. Let your breath guide you down into rest. The night is calm, and you are warm.